August 1944. Allied forces had landed in Normandy and were pushing toward Germany. Hitler's empire was collapsing from all sides, and at its centre stood one of the most beautiful cities in the world, Paris, caught in the path of destruction. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler was enraged. France, he believed, had betrayed him. The Allies were advancing faster than his generals had predicted, and the resistance within Paris had begun to rise. To Hitler, the city that had once symbolised art, romance and civilization was now a symbol of defiance. He gave a chilling order, an order that could have erased centuries of history in a single day. Paris must not fall into enemy hands. If it does, it must not remain a city. Burn it to the ground. And the man chosen to carry out that order was a German general named Dietrich von Choltitz. Dietrich Hugo Hermann von Choltitz was born in 1894 into a Prussian military family. Discipline and duty were in his blood. His father was an officer. His grandfather had served before him. As a young man, he grew up surrounded by the rigid honour code of the German officer corps, loyalty to the Kaiser, obedience without question, and faith in the chain of command. He joined the army in 1914 at the outbreak of the First World War as a young lieutenant in the Saxon Life Guards. He served on both the Eastern and Western fronts, witnessing firsthand the horror of modern warfare. By the time Germany surrendered in 1918, he was a decorated veteran, and like many of his generation, disillusioned, humiliated by the Versailles Treaty, and determined to restore his country's pride. In the 1930s, as Hitler rose to power, von Choltitz continued his career in the reorganised Wehrmacht. He wasn't a fanatic German, he never joined the party, but he was ambitious and loyal to the institution of the military. He believed in discipline, hierarchy and obedience. During the early years of World War II, he gained a reputation as a competent and decisive commander. He participated in the invasion of Poland in 1939, then France in 1940, and later in Russia, where he saw the brutality of the Eastern Front. His units were involved in some of the harshest fighting of the war, and like many officers, he followed orders that left deep moral scars. By 1944, Dietrich von Choltitz had reached the rank of General of Infantry. He was a professional soldier in the truest sense, pragmatic, efficient, and trained never to question a command. But that summer, his loyalty would be tested beyond measure. As Allied troops advanced from Normandy, Paris was boiling with unrest. The French resistance, inspired by the liberation of the countryside, began an open uprising. Barricades were rising in the streets, police stations were being seized, and German garrisons were being attacked. Hitler needed someone ruthless enough to crush the rebellion, someone who could restore German control and, if necessary, destroy the city. So on August 7th, 1944, he appointed General Dietrich von Choltitz as military governor of Paris. When von Choltitz arrived, the city was already trembling on the edge of chaos. Tens of thousands of German soldiers were scattered throughout Paris, exhausted and demoralized. Resistance fighters controlled large sections of the city. The Allies were closing in. His orders were clear: hold Paris at any cost, and if it cannot be held, destroy it. The command included specific instructions: demolish all bridges over the Seine, blow up the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, Notre Dame, the railway stations, the power plants, and the factories. In essence, erase Paris from the map. Von Choltitz immediately recognized the magnitude of this order. To destroy Paris would not just be a military act, it would be the annihilation of one of humanity's greatest cultural treasures. And yet, as a German general, disobeying Hitler's command was unthinkable. It could mean death. It could mean disgrace for his family. But as he walked through the streets, as he looked upon the monuments and the faces of the civilians, a different thought began to take root. Could he be the man who destroys Paris? Von Choltitz was not a sentimental man. He was a soldier who had seen too much death to romanticize war. But something in Paris changed him. Unlike in the East, where the war had been a merciless struggle of annihilation, in France he saw civilians trying to preserve their normal lives. He saw the city's beauty, its bridges, cathedrals and boulevards, and he understood its symbolic value. Destroying it would serve no military purpose. It would be an act of vengeance, pure and simple. But how does a man go from absolute obedience to defiance? For von Choltitz, it began with realization that Hitler's orders were no longer strategic, they were suicidal. The Führer's rage had blinded him. In late August, von Choltitz began receiving frantic messages from Berlin. "Is Paris burning?" Hitler demanded updates several times a day, and each time von Choltitz found a way to delay. He stalled the engineers preparing the explosives. He issued contradictory commands. He claimed communications were delayed or equipment wasn't ready. Behind the scenes, he opened secret communication channels with the Swedish consul, Raoul Nordling, who acted as an intermediary between the Germans and the French resistance. Nordling was instrumental. He convinced von Choltitz that surrender could happen peacefully, that destroying Paris would not stop the Allies, only stain Germany's honour forever. Over several secret meetings at the Hotel Meurice, Nordling and von Choltitz forged an unlikely trust. Nordling appealed not to his compassion, but to his professionalism as a soldier. He said, "You're not just a German general. You're a man of Europe. What you choose now will echo for centuries." By August 23, 1944, the French resistance had taken control of much of the city. The German garrison was crumbling. The Allies were only days away. Hitler's orders were now explicit. Destroy Paris immediately, blow up the bridges, ignite the fuel depots, flood the metro tunnels. But von Choltitz refused. He decided that he would not let Paris burn. Instead, he negotiated an informal ceasefire with the resistance through Nordling. He repositioned his troops to minimize fighting in the heart of the city and avoided firing on civilians. When the Allies approached, he ordered his remaining forces to withdraw strategically rather than turn the capital into a battlefield. On August 25, 1944, General von Choltitz surrendered Paris to General Philippe Leclerc of the Free French Army and General Charles de Gaulle's forces. When Leclerc confronted him, he famously asked, "Why didn't you destroy Paris as you were ordered?" Von Choltitz simply replied, "Because I didn't want to go down in history as the man who destroyed Paris." That same day, Charles de Gaulle marched triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées. Church bells rang for the first time in 4 years. Paris was free, and it stood intact. After the liberation, von Choltitz was taken prisoner by the Allies and held in a POW camp until 1947. Unlike many Nazi officials, he was not tried for war crimes. In fact, he was later praised, quietly, for his decision to save the city. Yet his legacy remained complex. Some accused him of acting only because he knew the war was lost, or because he hoped for leniency. Others believed he was genuinely moved by conscience, that for once a German officer had chosen civilization over destruction. Von Choltitz himself wrote an autobiography in 1951 titled "Is Paris Burning?", in which he explained his decision and detailed his final days in command. Decades later, journalists Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre used his story as the basis for their best-selling 1965 book of the same title, which was later adapted into a major motion picture. The title came from the question Hitler was said to have screamed into the telephone on August 25, 1944, upon hearing of the city's liberation. Von Choltitz never saw himself as a hero. In interviews before his death in 1966, he said simply, "I received an order to destroy Paris, but I knew that such an act would be useless. The military situation was hopeless. To destroy such beauty made no sense. History often remembers those who destroy, but sometimes it remembers those who refuse." Dietrich von Choltitz's Defiance saved one of humanity's greatest cities. His decision spared millions of lives, priceless works of art and centuries of heritage. He was not a perfect man. He was a soldier shaped by a brutal system, complicit in a regime that brought immense suffering. Yet in that final moment, he made a choice that transcended ideology, a choice that reminded the world that even in war there is still room for conscience. When Paris celebrates its liberation each year, it honours not just the Allied troops and the resistance, but also, quietly, the German general who refused to destroy it. Because sometimes history is defined not by the battles we fight, but by the ones we refuse to wage.